Telefonica UK Limited, trading and more commonly known as O2, have their headquarters in the town of Slough, which is located near the M25 and London. Specifically in this video, I will be talking about the masts on the roof of their site on Bath Road, which have undergone a significant change recently. Previously, the antennas used for frequency division duplex were a mixture of legacy Catherine antennas and Amphenol twin dual band ones, and the site carried 2G, 3G on 900 MHz, 3G on 2100 MHz, and then 4G on 800 MHz and 1800 MHz with 3 sector operations, so 3 sectors for everything. Meanwhile, there were 2 pictures here, Huawei ATD4516R5 antennas on the rooftop, which were used for operating the 2300 MHz TDD, also known as band 40, in 88R operation. It is notable that these antennas have 9 feeders going into them. 8 of them are used for the transmit and receive for 88R, and the 9th one is a calibration feeder. If we jump forward to today and focus on the frequency division duplex antennas to begin with, there are 2 shiny new Commscope antennas that we can see. The left one is a Commscope 2CPX308R5V3, which has 4 low band ports and is dual beam. And that antenna carries 4G 800 MHz and 3G 900 MHz with 2 beams. So across the 3 sets of antennas like this, there are 6 beams, so 6 sectors for 3G 900 MHz and 4G 800 MHz. Meanwhile, the antenna on the right is a Commscope CVV2NPX308.208R, which is a 10-port antenna with 4 ultra-wide high ports at the back of the antenna, which are standard beam width, and then it has low band ports, 2 low band ports, which are also standard beam width, and then it has 2 sets of 2 high narrowband ports, each of which emit a separate beam. Therefore, the right antenna emits 1 beam of 2G on 900 MHz and then 2 beams of 4G 1800 MHz and then 2100 MHz in 3G and 4G for now, because eventually the refarm will be finished and then it will carry only 4G on 2100 MHz. So all in all, across the overall mast, so that antenna times by 3, there will then be 3 sectors of 2G 900 and 6 sectors of 3G and 4G 2100 MHz and 6 sectors of 4G 1800 MHz. Add on the panel on the left, which also has 6 sectors of 4G 800 and 6 sectors of 3G 900, and functionally for frequency division duplex, the site is 6 sectors for all of the frequencies apart from the 2G 900 MHz, which is 3 sectors. Masts with a layout like this are incredibly common in central London because having these 6 sectors of capacity on the data carrying technologies and bands means that you get increased capacity over a 3 sector site. Not quite double the capacity, but still a nice boost in capacity where clearly in London it is needed. And certainly 6 sectors of 4G on 800 MHz, 1800 MHz and 2100 MHz, so that's potentially 6 sectors of 25 MHz of spectrum, is a not insignificant amount of capacity. Moving back to Slough for a moment and the time division duplex setup and how it's changed, the Huawei ATD4516R5 antennas remain, the 3 of them, again 2 in this picture. However, they have lost a number of feeders. In fact, they now only have 4 feeders going to the antennas, which would indicate a 44R capability for the 2300 MHz. Now this is interesting in a number of ways, because if they were just trialling 44R and they had plans to test 88R again, for example, then they wouldn't remove the extra 5 feeders. They just leave them there and just have them disconnected at the base station end. To actually physically remove those 5 feeders is pretty indicative of the fact they don't plan to have it running as 88R again. Secondly, there are those 4 unpopulated high ultra wideband ports on the back of the Commscope 10-port antennas that they've recently installed. Now with these ports being high ultra wideband, they would be able to take the 2300 MHz and run it in 44R, so it is a bit odd that they have kept the 2300 MHz being operated through the Huawei panels. It is especially bizarre because, as I showed earlier, the high capacity London O2 masts use 3 pairs of these Commscope antennas. They have those for high ultra wideband ports unpopulated as well. And if you were going to do a rapid 2300 MHz deployment, if they acquire it in the upcoming auction process, you would expect that they would want to feed the 2300 MHz through those ports on the existing antenna to save having to do an antenna swap. Therefore, it is a bit odd that they haven't got this end stage deployment layout in use on their site, on their headquarters. However, it may simply just be because when I visited they hadn't moved the feeders across from the Huawei panels to the Commscope ones for 2300, or it could be that they're at the early stage of comparing the performance of 44R on the Huawei panel, and that they'll move the feeders over to the Commscope one later and just get an idea of how the Commscope panel performs in comparison at 44R on 2300 MHz. But certainly, as I said, if they are going to deploy 2300 MHz rapidly, they would seriously want to do it through the Commscope 10-port antennas, because doing antenna swaps, especially with all the other feeders that are going into that 10-port antenna, will be very time consuming. And additionally, if they want to add another antenna, as you can see from these London masts, it would involve quite a lot of rearrangement and a bigger head frame in order to do that, if it's even possible with the weight loading capabilities of the masts or even local authority planning restrictions. Hopefully, however, it won't be too long until we find out whether O2 manages to acquire the spectrum that they clearly desperately want, and understandably so, and then see how they deploy it onto the wider commercial network. It all hinges on the outcome of Three's appeal against the Ofcom spectrum auction process, which will be heard in court in a couple of weeks. And if Three's appeal is rejected, then hopefully O2 should be able to acquire the spectrum pretty shortly and then get it deployed. So maybe we'll see some O2 2300 MHz 4G deployed in a few months from now if all goes well. Although if Three wins the appeal, then things I'm sure will take an awful lot longer. Thanks for watching. If you have any opinions, comments, ideas, or anything like that, feel free to leave a comment. It's always nice to read them. And I'll see you on the next video.